You get it for your 6, 7, 8, or it's a big cooperative in Spain or Italy that's been doing this for years. And, this fits a certain part of the market, which is most of it. And then you have quality wine, right? And in quality wine, you have the little guy that's making the handmade stuff in Burgundy, and his family's been doing it for 3, 4, 5 generations. And then you have the recognized chateaus. Now, when you start to get into the recognized chateaus, they've built up a long history, like what you'd see in Saint-Emilion, right? And the Cheval Blanc, White Horse, that sells for hundreds, right? Along with other wines like that. Now, is that worth it? I don't know, right? Is a marginal difference in quality worth a lot of money between a wine that maybe costs 30 euro?
Returns and,
you have diminishing returns. Some of it's probably perception. Some of it's the heritage. Some of it's prestige. Somebody wants to show off that they can afford a bottle of Cheval Blanc in front of their friends. So there's probably a number of variables in there, but it's like any other luxury good. How much better can you make a perfume, right?
Right.
Is a 60 euro perfume any worse than a 180 euro perfume? So there may be marginal differences, but a lot of it's perception marketing and whatnot.
So what would you say, how much should a bottle of wine cost? Like, if you don't want to spend too much money about that, it's like a quality wine. Is it like 20 euros per bottle or less? Or what would you say? If you go to like Kaufland, there's you can buy it for 2 euros. That's obviously not good, but so what would be a fair price?
I think it's going to depend on the type, the variety of the grape, because different grapes produce different quantities, and that's going to affect the price, and the size of the winery, right? If you get a very small winery like I have, the cost per bottle is quite high because the fixed costs are spread over a very small amount. Where if you go to a good producer that puts out, like what we have here at Testament, they're going to put out a couple 100,000 bottles. So the staff costs and the equipment costs and accounting costs, it's going to be a fraction per bottle of what I would.
When I was driving, I was never even really here. I was driving here. Wow, the vineyards are huge.
Yeah, so
I wasn't expecting it.
You get economy of scale, don't you? Even though I'd have to say here, it's very labor intensive. Everything's done by hand here.
Oh.
So, you don't have mechanical harvest, which adds to the cost.
To the price,
so they're not, the economy of scale that they're getting is nowhere near what you're going to have in the big farms in Australia and South Africa and Spain and whatnot. So back to your question, how much should a good bottle of wine cost? It's going to be on the type.
Okay.
Right. So the amount of produce that comes off that particular vine, right? And it's also going to be the scale that you're doing it at. Now, as a small winemaker, one of the advantages that we have, and there's not many, not many is, I remember, I'll sum it up this way. I have a good friend, Mark from the Netherlands, and he tried my very first wine in 2015 and said, "This is great. How are you going to make sure that it's the same next year?" And I said, "Well, Mark, I'm not. It's going to be different next year.
Yeah.
It's going to be different weather conditions. I may try to do it differently. I may make it." And that's the one advantage of a small winemaker is when you go to a big winery or a supermarket, you tend to know that brand and you have a certain level of expectations that it's the same next year, right? Conchuy Toro from Chile. Cabernet, it's going to taste the same 2 years from now, more or less, as it did when you had it the first time 2 years ago, right? And that's what you want. You want a certain quality control. When you go to a small winery, you want to discover and you want to find something different. What is your 215 like versus the one I'm drinking now, which is your 219? Do you have any? I have people coming now asking me for my 216 Cuvée, which is long gone because it's quite a bit different than the one I just sold, right? And that happened in their glass. So that's your one competitive advantage, and that does affect price. So then you start saying, okay, if somebody values that experience, they're going to be willing to pay more than saying, it's Tuesday night, I'm on the way home from work, I want to have
grab something,
a glass of wine with my wife. It's going to be €7. And that's what my budget is for sense. Tonight. Yeah. So there's a real diversity. And that's one of the things I really love about the wine industry or wine in general is that diversity. And you may have a very different taste than I have, and neither is better, right?
Right.
It's your preference, and that's what's beautiful about the diversity. If I was to say one thing about Croatia wine, And Croatia wine is not recognized very well around the world yet. Little by little, it's becoming. What really attracted me here was the diversity of the grapes, and in particular Dalmatia. We have over 100 plus different varieties of grapes just in Dalmatia.
Wow, really?
And more are being discovered when you got the islands have their own little, almost forgotten varieties. And I've never seen like that anywhere else in the world, that you have such the number of grapes, and they've survived, even through the whole socialist period with the cooperative winemaking. You have this diversity that I've seen nowhere else in the world. And it's great. It's discovery. You can go to the Vis, and all of a sudden you get introduced to Vugava, which nobody grows anywhere else. Hvar has a bunch of different varietals that you will find nowhere else. And then you have the big ones like Plavac Male and lesser so Babic. But it's fascinating to me, the diversity.
So back to London. So you're in IT in London. So how did you end up in Jadrtovac of all places? I need to know this. I mean, can you even pronounce the village name?
Yeah, exactly. No. This is quite funny because Jadrtovac takes you about 3 years just to, not to mention the Croatian language.
It's horrible.
So how did I get to this lovely village? So I was concentrating mostly on the south, and kept coming back to Korčula and that region, and wanted to buy a piece of property. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it. I was highly interested in wine, but I wasn't thinking yet. And then I started turning and say, I really would like to have a bit of land and grow a few vines. And at this point, it wasn't supposed to be a commercial venture, which we can talk about. I'm not really a big commercial venture. Mm-hmm. But at the time it was, when I retire, what do I want to do, right? And at the time in the UK, and I won't get into the details, but we had what were called annuities for pension, which means you saved your money, your company might have put some money in, and at the end of it, you would get an annuity, which means an insurance or pension company would pay you, in effect, an allowance for your savings. And if you died, they kept the rest of it.
Like an investment? Or
they chose the investment, and they would tell you, we'll pay you X amount. If you give us your pile of money that's locked away, we'll give you this amount per month.
But I guess it wasn't taxed or something, so there has to be a carrot in there somewhere.
Well, it was very much not a monopoly, but there was 5 or 6 big pension providers, and it was almost like collusion,
Right.
But they changed the law. But at the time, I'm like, well, I'm not going to give this pension fund my money, because what do I want to do in the end anyways? I want to go to a beautiful place like Croatia, by the sea, have a few vines, a few olive trees, a little boat, and fish. So why should I get an allowance from these guys? Why don't I just put my money into the land directly? Yeah. And then when I retire, also an
investment, right?
It's an investment, right? So I wanted the control rather than give the control to an investment house.
So how did you end up in the Šibenik area?
So here's the thing. So like I said, I was focusing on southern Dalmatia, and I was working at another IT job, not the AMS. It was a Anglo-Dutch company, and they had a reduction of workforce. And I got an opportunity, which was, you can go into our utilities practice and become an SAP consultant. SAP is a big inventory management finance system for a large company, German company. In the utilities practice, and I was doing the digital media practice at the time, or you can take this money and leave. And I said, how quickly can you get it into my account? This was on a Friday. Monday it was there. I hopped in I have an old VW van from the 60s, the old hippie
ones,
things with the hippie ones. Bush, I was gone by Friday, and I was coming right here. And I went down, of course, to Korčula, and then I worked my way up the coast. There wasn't the motorway at the time. And just by chance, I stopped in Jasenova, which is a campsite just here, just south of Žabarič. And I got to be good buddies with the campsite owner, who had worked for an American company on a ship. And he was a ship engineer, as many Dalmatians do. So I stayed there for about 5 weeks, camped right on the beach with the Splitty, and I then tried Babic for the first time, which was a wine from Leo Grassen from Primostan, and I just fell in love. Of all the different wines I tried in the world, all of a sudden, what is this? What is this grape? And I became obsessed with it. So I met Leo, fascinating guy, professor. Now he's in Split, but he was in Zagreb at the time. Wonderful guy, shares his knowledge and his passion about Babic. Babic at the time almost was gone. It was. There were a few families growing it in the Primostan area.
Really, but it's so well known now. I guess
It's had a whole renaissance. So this is going back 19 years, and Babic was really scarce at the time.